Hey everyone, and welcome back to the deep dive. Today we're going to be tackling something that I think a lot of people get wrong. We're diving into the difference between autistic shutdown and stonewalling. And we're using this great article from Cheap ABA called Autistic Shutdown versus Stonewalling, Understanding the Difference. And this is important stuff because, well, when we misunderstand what's happening, it can really mess up our relationships with autistic folks.
Yeah, that's a really important point. I mean, it's not just about getting the words right or whatever. It's more about like recognizing that autistic people experience things so differently. And a lot of the time the way they react, it's them trying to cope with all this sensory input. That can feel like way too much.
Right. So it's not that they're being difficult, it's that they're literally experiencing the world in a different way. So maybe let's start by defining what autistic shutdown actually is.
Okay, so imagine you're in this room and like every sound is turned up to 11. Every light is like blinding. And even the tiniest touch feels like sandpaper scraping against your skin. That feeling of just constant bombardment. That's kind of what sensory overload can be like for some autistic people.
Mm-hmm.
And so shutdown is what happens when it's like their system's way of saying, whoa, too much.
Yeah.
They kind of disconnect from everything around them just to get back to some kind of balance.
So it's not a choice they're making, it's like a reaction to this really intense experience.
Exactly. And it can look different for different people. Someone might suddenly stop talking. They might completely withdraw from everyone around them, or even seem kind of numb or out of it. They might feel emotionally frozen, like they just can't deal with what's going on around them.
Now, this is where I think things get confusing for a lot of people.
Sure.
Because some of what you're describing, it might seem like what we call stonewalling.
Right, and that's the tricky part. Because while the behaviors might look kind of similar on the surface, the motivation behind them is totally different. With stonewalling, it's deliberate. It's like a tactic people use to get what they want, like maybe to avoid a fight, or to control the situation, or even to manipulate the other person.
Yeah, I get that. It's like that classic silent treatment.
Exactly. You could be ignoring what someone's saying, giving really vague answers, or just using silence as a way to punish someone.
So both shutdown and stonewalling can involve less communication, but the reason why is completely different.
Absolutely. One's a reaction to feeling overwhelmed, and the other is more like a calculated move.
And I bet mixing those two up can cause some serious problems.
You bet it can. I mean, on a personal level, it can really damage relationships. Imagine you're trying to talk to someone, and they just completely shut down on you. If you think they're doing it on purpose to ignore you or dismiss what you're saying,
Yeah.
you're going to feel hurt, right? Maybe even angry.
Yeah, it would feel like they just don't care.
Exactly. And that can lead to all this resentment and conflict, which just makes it harder to connect with the person.
And this isn't just about one bad interaction. It kind of feeds into this bigger misunderstanding of autism in general.
That's right. It reinforces all these harmful stereotypes about autistic people, that they're being difficult or manipulative.
Yeah.
Or that they just don't care about other people's feelings.
So it's not just a personal thing, it's like a societal thing too.
Yeah, it can have a real impact on how autistic people are treated in all kinds of situations, at school, at work, even within their own families.
It's like they're constantly being judged.
They might face unfair punishments, or they might be isolated from others, or denied the support they need to actually thrive.
This is really making me think about how much damage a lack of understanding can do.
It's huge. But the good news is, awareness is the first step. The more we learn about autistic shutdown and how it's different from stonewalling, the better we'll be able to respond with empathy and understanding.
Okay, so that's a great starting point. But how do we actually get better at telling the difference? In real life situations, are there any telltale signs we should look for?
That's a good question. And it can be kind of tricky. Because even though the reasons behind shutdown and stonewalling are totally different, the way they look might seem similar.
So someone might be nonverbal in both cases, but for different reasons.
Exactly. One person's brain might be totally overloaded, while the other person is choosing to stay silent to control how the conversation goes.
So it's about trying to figure out what's going on beneath the surface.
Right. You got to look beyond the behavior itself.
Yeah.
And try to understand the context and what the person's actually trying to do.
And how do we do that?
Well, one clue is their body language. Like someone who's shutting down, they might show signs of distress, like rocking back and forth or flapping their hands. Or maybe their breathing changes.
So it's not just that they're being quiet, it's that there are other signs that something's wrong.
Right. They might even have this look on their face, like they're overwhelmed or scared.
While someone who's stonewalling Would they look different?
Yeah, they might seem more like stoic or in control. Maybe they'll make eye contact,
Mm.
but their face doesn't really show any warmth or interest.
So it's about paying attention to those subtle cues.
Exactly. And of course, if you know the person well, it helps to think about their usual behavior. Like, are they usually pretty talkative and engaged, and now they're suddenly withdrawn? That could be a sign that they're shutting down.
That's a good point. It's about looking at the whole picture.
Right. And remembering that every autistic person is different.
So no jumping to conclusions.
Nope.
So to sum it all up, if we're trying to figure out if someone's shutting down or stonewalling, we got to look at the whole situation, their body language, and what we know about them as a person.
You got it. It's like detective work, looking for clues to understand what's really going on.
And I guess the most important thing is to give people the benefit of the doubt.
Always. Remember, shutdown is a way of protecting themselves. It's not a personal attack.
Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground here. We've defined autistic shutdown and how it's different from stonewalling. And we've talked about how mixing them up can have some serious consequences. But now I want to dig deeper into what happens when we get it wrong. What are the real-world effects for autistic people? When shutdown is mistaken for stonewalling.
Yeah, that's where things get really serious.
I can imagine it leads to a lot of frustration on both sides.
Oh, absolutely. If someone thinks an autistic person is shutting them out on purpose, they're going to react badly. They might get angry or feel hurt or even accuse the person of being manipulative.
And then that just makes things worse for the autistic person.
Exactly. It creates this vicious cycle where misunderstanding leads to conflict, and then the conflict makes it even harder for the autistic person to cope.
So we have to understand that shutdown is not just a choice.
Right. It's actually rooted in how their brains work. Autistic people often process sensory information differently, so things like sights and sounds and textures, even social interactions, they can feel much more intense than they do for neurotypical people.
So it's not just about being more sensitive, it's that their brains are literally wired differently.
Exactly. And when all that input gets to be too much, shutdown is like a safety mechanism. The brain kind of shuts down some functions to prevent a total overload.
Wow, so it's like a survival mechanism.
It is. It's not a sign of weakness or anything.
That makes a lot of sense. I mean, think about it. Their brains are working overtime just to handle everyday stuff.
They are. That's why it's so important to create environments that are sensory friendly for autistic people. Places where they can minimize all that overwhelming input.
So like places that are quiet and predictable.
Yeah, think about soft lighting, quiet spaces, routines that they can rely on.
So if we can help them feel more in control of their environment, that might help prevent shutdown from happening in the first place.
Exactly. And that's where awareness and understanding come in.
We need to learn to recognize those sensory needs.
And then we can start designing spaces and interactions that are more inclusive and accommodating.
It all goes back to challenging those stereotypes and accepting neurodiversity.
Absolutely. We have to recognize that autistic people aren't broken or deficient. They just experience the world differently.
And that difference isn't a bad thing.
Nope, it's something to be celebrated.
Okay, so we've laid the groundwork here. We understand the difference between shutdown and stonewalling, and we've talked about the consequences of getting it wrong. But now I want to know, what can we actually do to support someone who's experiencing shutdown?
That's the million-dollar question.
What are some practical steps we can take?
Well, the first thing, and this is the most important thing, is to recognize that shutdown is happening and respond with empathy and compassion.
So don't get defensive, don't take it personally.
Exactly. It's not about you. The person needs your support, not your judgment.
Okay, so what does support look like?
Oh, well, the first step is creating a calm and quiet environment. Reduce the sensory input as much as possible. Dim the lights. Turn off any loud noises. Get rid of any visual distractions.
So basically the opposite of a busy street corner.
Pretty much. Think peaceful, serene, sensory friendly.
Okay, so we're creating a calm space. What about talking to them? Should we try to talk to them? Or just give them space?
That really depends on the person and the situation. Some people might find it helpful to have someone talk to them in a soothing voice, but others might prefer silence. If you're not sure, just ask.
That's a good reminder. Even in a tough situation, communication is key.
Always. And remember, it takes time to recover from shutdown. Be patient. Don't rush them. Don't expect them to just snap out of it.
Let them recover at their own pace.
Exactly. Just let them know you're there for them. when they're ready.
Okay, so we've covered a lot in this first part of our deep dive. We've defined autistic shutdown. We've talked about how it's different from stonewalling, and we've even touched on what it looks like to be supportive. But we're not done yet. When we come back, we'll be talking about more practical strategies for supporting someone during shutdown, common mistakes to avoid, and the bigger picture of what all this means for society. Stay tuned. So before the break, we were getting into like the actual hands-on stuff, what to do when you're with someone who's experiencing shutdown.
Yeah, because knowing is one thing, but what do you do right?
Exactly. So let's say you're in that situation, you see someone starting to shut down. What are the first couple things you should do, even before you like get them to a quiet room or whatever?
Okay, first thing, shift your mindset. Remember, it's not about you. It's not them being rude or trying to upset you. It's their system basically hitting the emergency brake.
Like their brain is saying, nope, can't handle this.
Exactly. And if you can stay calm and empathetic, you're already helping a ton just with that.
So you become the chill person in their overwhelming moment.
Yeah, kind of like that.
Yeah.
Now, practically speaking, there are a few things you can do right away to ease the situation. Number one, reduce sensory input. Is it loud? Can you move somewhere quieter? Is there a ton of visual stuff going on? See if you can simplify that. Even just turning down lights can help.
So even if you can't create like a perfect calm environment right then, just little things to dial down the intensity.
Every bit helps. And while you're doing that, communicate clearly and simply. No big questions or complicated requests. Just let them know you see they're overwhelmed, and you're going to help make things calmer.
Is this a good time to ask if there's anything specific they need? Or is it better to wait till they're a bit more settled?
Depends on the person and how far into shutdown they are. But offering a simple choice can be good. Like, do you want to move to that corner where it's quieter?
Yeah.
Or should I try dimming the lights here? It gives them a little bit of control,
Yeah.
even if they can't say exactly what they need right then.
Okay, so we've toned down the immediate chaos. And we've given them some simple choices. What about like offering direct support or comfort? Is that helpful or could it backfire?
This is where knowing the person really helps. Some autistic people find touch really soothing, but others absolutely hate it, especially during shutdown.
So if you know what they like, proceed accordingly.
Right, but if it's someone you don't know well, err on the side of caution. Verbal reassurance is usually fine, like, you're safe, I'm here to help, we'll get through this. But unless you know they like touch, don't touch, just being a calm, non-demanding presence, that's often the best support you can give.
This is really helpful advice. It sounds like it's more about observing and respecting than trying to like fix the situation.
Exactly, you can't force someone out of shutdown any more than you can force someone out of a migraine. The key is to create the conditions for their system to reset.
And our source also points out that mistaking shutdown for stonewalling can have effects that last way beyond that moment.
Yeah, that's a crucial point. If an autistic person keeps getting punished or judged for shutting down, that can lead to some serious problems down the line.
Like what kind of problems?
Well, for starters, it can really wreck their self-esteem. Imagine being told over and over that you're being difficult or manipulative, when really you're just trying to cope. Over time, that can make someone feel ashamed, like they're worthless or a burden.
And I imagine it could make them scared to ask for help.
Definitely. They might start to believe that their needs are wrong, or that they're bothering people by just existing. And that can lead to isolation, anxiety, depression.
So it's not just about one misunderstanding. It's about the overall message it sends.
It affects their whole sense of self and how they interact with the world.
And this is why we need to understand autism better.
We need to stop judging based on these harmful stereotypes and start creating a culture where autistic people feel safe being themselves.
Which brings us to something that was mentioned earlier, masking.
Ah, yes.
Masking.
Can you explain what that is and how it connects to shutdown?
So masking is when an autistic person, they kind of hide their autistic traits to appear more neurotypical.
So they're trying to fit in?
Yeah, basically. Like they might force themselves to make eye contact or copy social behaviors that don't come naturally to them or even hide their special interests.
Because they feel like they have to.
Right, and sometimes it's necessary, especially in situations where they feel a lot of pressure to fit in. But it sounds exhausting.
It is incredibly draining. It takes so much energy to constantly monitor and adjust your behavior.
Trying to meet these expectations that don't really fit who you are.
And for a lot of autistic people, shutdown is a direct result of that prolonged masking. Their brains are working overtime to process everything and suppress their natural responses. Eventually, something's got to give.
So it's like their system is overloaded from all that effort.
Exactly. It's like their body and mind are saying, I can't do this anymore?
Which makes it even more important to create environments where they don't have to mask.
Absolutely, places where they can just be themselves without feeling like they have to pretend to be someone they're not.
And that starts with understanding and acceptance.
For sure, the more we learn about autism and challenge those expectations that force people to mask, the closer we get to a world where neurodiversity is truly celebrated.
Okay, so we've talked about the consequences of mistaking shutdown for stonewalling, the role of masking, and the need for more inclusive environments. But I want to come back to those practical support strategies.
Okay, let's get specific.
We talked about reducing sensory input, giving choices, being calm. What else can people do to help during an episode of shutdown?
One really powerful thing is validation. Let the person know you see their struggle, that you understand they're overwhelmed, and that it's okay to feel that way.
So even if we don't totally get what they're going through, we can still acknowledge their experience without judgment.
Exactly. Just saying things like, it looks like you're having a really hard time right now. Or, I can see you're overwhelmed, and that's okay. That can make a huge difference.
It shows them that they're not alone.
Exactly. And they're not being judged for how they're feeling.
Now, would this be a good time to offer physical comfort, like a hug or something?
That's tricky. Remember, touch can be really sensitive during shutdown. So always ask for consent. You could say, would you like a hug or would you prefer some space?
Respecting boundaries, even when someone's struggling.
Always. And another thing that can help is sensory aids, if they have any that they use.
Like weighted blankets or fidget toys.
Yeah, those kinds of things. If you know they have something specific that helps them regulate, have it ready.
And even if you don't know their specific preferences, maybe you could offer a soft blanket or something.
That's a good idea. And finally, and this is so important, be patient. Recovery from shutdown takes time. Don't rush them. Don't expect them to snap out of it.
No deadlines, no expectations.
Exactly. Just be there for them.
Yeah.
And let them know you'll wait as long as they need.
This is great advice. I feel like we've covered so much practical stuff in this section.
Hopefully it's helpful for people.
Are there any, common mistakes people make when they're trying to help?
Oh yeah, definitely. One big one is trying to force interaction or communication. Remember, shutdown is about needing space and time to process. Pushing someone to talk before they're ready can actually make things worse.
So no trying to fill the silence or force eye contact?
Right. Just respect their need for quiet and let them know you're there when they're ready.
Another one I've seen is trying to distract them.
Like offering food or activities.
Yeah, like trying to cheer them up.
That's often well-intentioned. But remember, shutdown is a response to sensory overload. So adding more stimulation can make it harder for them to calm down.
So instead of trying to fix it, we focus on creating that calm environment.
Exactly. Just be present with them. Maybe offer a comforting touch if they're okay with it. Remind them that they're safe and loved.
It all comes back to sensory awareness.
Absolutely. What feels good to one person might be overwhelming to another, especially during shutdown.
So pay attention to what they're telling you.
Even if it's not with words.
There's no one right way to support someone in shutdown.
Every person is different.
It's about being present, being empathetic.
Yeah.
And being willing to adjust based on what they need.
That's what it's all about.
So we've talked about the practical stuff, but this whole conversation makes me think about something bigger, like how we as a society view and interact with neurodiversity.
You're right. It goes way beyond individual interaction.
When we come back, we'll explore those broader implications. What does it mean to really embrace neurodiversity? Stick with us. Okay, so we spent this whole episode talking about shutdown. And it's clear that it's about way more than just one person's behavior, right?
Yeah, it really is. I mean, if you think about how often shutdown is misunderstood, it kind of shows how much our society expects everyone to be the same. Like everyone's supposed to operate on this neurotypical wavelength.
And if you don't fit that mold, you're the one with the problem.
Exactly. It's like we design our whole world. Classrooms, workplaces, social gatherings, assuming everyone processes information and sensory input the same way. And when an autistic person reacts differently, like maybe they have a meltdown or shutdown, it's seen as their fault, like they need to fix themselves.
Instead of thinking, hey, maybe the environment is the problem.
Exactly.
So it's like we've built this system that only works for one type of person.
And everyone else is expected to conform.
Or else be labeled as different or difficult.
Right. And that pressure to conform, to mask those natural autistic traits, it can be so damaging.
I can't imagine how exhausting it must be to constantly try to fit in, to suppress who you are.
It takes a huge toll.
And for some people, shutdown becomes the only way out.
Like their body and mind are saying, I can't keep pretending anymore.
So we need to change things.
We need to move from this culture of conformity to a culture of acceptance.
Where being different is okay.
More than okay. It's valued.
Like neurodiversity is a strength, not a weakness.
Exactly.
This makes me think about how often autistic kids get in trouble at school for being disruptive.
Oh, yeah. All the time.
But what if they're just reacting to an environment that's overwhelming for them?
Right. Like imagine a kid having a meltdown because the fluorescent lights are giving them a sensory overload. Instead of recognizing that trigger, the kid gets punished, which just reinforces the idea that they're the problem.
When really the problem is the environment.
Exactly. And that can be so damaging for their self-esteem.
It tells them that their needs don't matter.
That their experiences aren't valid.
We need to start seeing those behaviors as a form of communication.
A sign that something needs to change.
In the environment, not the person.
Exactly.
So how do we make those changes?
It starts with awareness, like what we're doing here, talking about these issues, educating ourselves and others.
Challenging those old assumptions.
And then we can start making concrete changes.
Like what kind of changes?
Well, think about schools. We need classrooms with sensory-friendly lighting, flexible seating options.
What about workplaces?
We need to accommodate different communication styles, different sensory sensitivities.
And social spaces.
They should be inclusive and welcoming to everyone.
No matter how they experience the world.
That's the goal.
This sounds like a big shift.
It is.
Where do we even start?
Starts with each of us.
What can our listener do in their own life to help create these more inclusive environments?
Well, first, educate yourself. Read books, watch documentaries, listen to autistic voices.
Learn from people who have lived experience.
Exactly. And once you have that knowledge, share it.
Talk to your friends, your family, your coworkers.
Advocate for change in your community.
Make those ripples.
And most importantly, treat autistic people with respect.
Listen to their stories.
Value their perspectives.
Support their right to be themselves.
That's how we make a difference.
I love that. This has been such an eye-opening conversation.
I'm glad.
Any last thoughts for our listener?
Yeah, just this. When you meet someone who's different from you, someone whose behavior you don't understand, approach them with curiosity, not judgment.
Ask questions, listen with an open mind.
Try to see the world from their perspective
That's how we build connection.
and understanding.
So well said. And on that note, we'll wrap up this episode of The Deep Dive. We hope you learned something new today, and maybe even feel inspired to make a change. Remember, knowledge is power, and the more we understand each other, the more compassionate our world becomes.
Thanks for listening.